Stick around until the end of the video and I'll explain why the Russian Federation fears the possibility of American fighter jets being introduced into Ukraine. For starters, the Russians already have a pretty decent technological gap in between US aircraft and their current Russian Federation aircraft. Some of the Russian Federation aircraft that I guess you could say are the highest end are aircraft like the Su-30 in terms of air superiority fighters. These are about as good as they can get for the Russians, and they are pretty decent in a way. They emphasize super maneuverability, which is I guess you could say, a kind of flight style where if this thing needed to pull some very hard turns, it would be able to do that quite well. But in a modern war and in the modern world, needing super maneuverability is really out of the question. It's not even really needed. And so while these aircraft do have super maneuverability on their side, which is somewhat important, in other terms, it's not really that important because usually dogfights, if you want to call them that even, occur beyond visual range, where these aircraft are so far away from each other that they're firing missiles over the horizon at each other. And so the possibility of super maneuverability ever being needed by this aircraft isn't that great. But beside that, how good is the Su-30 and how would it pair up against an aircraft like the F-16 or even the F-15? Well, for starts, still not that bad. It's a little bit of a dated design. It is heavily improved Su-27, but beyond that, they're not that bad, and they still can carry some of the heavier hitting air-to-air missiles that the Russians have, like the R-27, the R-73s, and also the RVV-AE, which is a active radar homing beyond visual range air-to-air missile, kind of similar to, I guess you could say, an AIM-120 AMRAAM, or something similar to like that in the American equivalent. However, one thing that we do know is that the Russians, due to their lack of military budget, while they can have a decent amount of these in storage, a decent amount of them aren't operational, and so for the most part, they'll be relying on smaller missiles like the R-73E, which is I guess you could say they're the Russian equivalent of an AIM-9, which is a missile that the United States would use. But beyond all of that, the reason why Russians fear American aircraft being introduced into the theater is mostly because Russian computer technology is incredibly far behind. And nowadays, in the modern world, aircraft rely more so on the abilities of their, I guess you could say, onboard computer systems than they do anything else. And considering that the Russians, as far as we know, are far behind in their computation technology. In fact, their computer sector doesn't even exist inside of Russia. Everything they have has to be exported from outside of Russia. We can get the good idea that the computers inside of the Su-30s have to be incredibly lacking, something that doesn't even compare to American aircraft. And that's why something like the F-16C right here is incredibly scary to the Russians just on an air superiority aspect, because these things could be used quite easily and quite effectively, considering that their computers would be leaps and bounds above the Russian ones, and so it'd be able to pick up aircraft a lot easier, pick up a lot more information from its radar, and also be able to, I guess you could say, communicate with other forces nearby a lot better. But these aircraft, by and large, are just better for the reason that they definitely have better computational systems. Not only that, but the F-16 has something that a lot of Russian aircraft do not have, which is the ability to be multi-role. And while the Su-30 is called a multi-role fighter, if you really look at what it's able to carry, it's not that multi-role, especially compared to an American aircraft. This thing is pretty much, and if we look through all of these, a 500-kilogram bomb, another 500-kilogram bomb, a 1,500-kilogram bomb. This one's laser-guided. Ooh, scary. Finally, a laser-guided bomb. Another dumb bomb. Another dumb bomb. You can get the picture. Pretty much everything that this can carry is a dumb bomb, except for one, and I believe that they can only carry 2 of them at a time. And so this thing is not at all multi-role. It's only multi-role in the name that it can carry some bombs, but it's not multi-role in the capacity that American aircraft are multi-role, like the F-16C. This thing can be an air superiority fighter on one sortie, and literally by just loading up bombs and other kinds of weaponry, it can become a ground attack aircraft in just a matter of about a half hour. This is what is the shining light of an aircraft like the F-16, is that it can be used for both fighting other aircraft that are in the airspace and also for close air support missions. And there's also something we're about to touch on that is really important about these aircraft that would be a massive step up for the Ukrainians compared to what they're currently using. But getting down to the weapons loadouts for the F-16, you can see that the list is incredibly extensive. First, you can see the AIM-9 Sidewinders and the AIM-120 AMRAAMs, which are probably some of the best missiles in the world at the moment. We can also see some foreign-used weapons. These are actually made by the Rafael company. These are most likely also used by Israel. And we can also see all of the air-to-surface weapons that the F-16 can carry, including the bombs. And you can see that both of these are an extensive list. Now remember, an aircraft like the Su-30, one of the best quote-unquote multi-role fighters that the Russians has, can only carry nothing but dom bombs and maybe one guided bomb. So let's take a look at what the F-16 can carry. Let's see, starting off with some AGM-65 Mavericks, which guide themselves to the target. It's not a laser guided missile, but it takes a picture of its target and it flies itself to wherever that picture was taken, which is a very interesting system. The AGM-88 Harm, which is very big, we'll get back to that in a second, and the AGM-154, which is a glide bomb. A lot higher end than what the Russians are able to provide on an Su-30. Not only that, but you can look at all the bombs, and every single one of these bombs pretty much is a laser-guided bomb of one sort or another. And so these things are massively above the Su-30, because while the Su-30 is using a ballistics computer to see where those bombs will fall, the F-16 can guide these bombs at very odd angles sometimes onto their target and also drop them from a pretty good distance away without ever even having to get close to the target to drop the bombs off. And for that reason, it would be a lot more difficult to shoot down an F-16 because of how many weapons of different kinds and how high quality they are that it can carry. And not only that, but it's also going to pose a massive problem for the Russians having the possibility of shooting down these aircraft from here forward, because an F-16 can carry the AGM-88 Harm, which is an anti-radiation missile. And many people may have heard that the AGM-88 Harm is in Ukraine. And in fact, it has been for several months, but there is a massive problem and a massive difference in between how they're currently using it and how they get used these Harms with an F-16. The Harms that we're talking about are literally just all the same. It's literally just an AGM-88 Harm, and there are different variations of it, but all of them do the same job, and really the variations just depend on the range of the missile. But how the Ukrainians have currently been using it is that this thing has kind of just been slapped onto the bottom of a Russian aircraft, or well, Soviet-era aircraft like an Su-27 or a MiG-29, and they fly it out there towards the front line, and they use an iPad, which they've hooked up in the cockpit, to just fire the thing off. And then the AGM-88 has this mode inside of the missile where it can target things on the ground after it fired that it hadn't locked onto initially. Not really the best way to fire them off, and it also relies on the Ukrainians having a decent amount of luck firing them, where the AGM-88 Harm would actually pick up something in the distance and then start flying towards it. That requires a lot of luck, and that's something that makes it somewhat inefficient to currently use the AGM-88 Harms in the current way the Ukrainians are having to use them with the jerry-rigged system they're having to operate off of. But with the F-16, that's completely removed, thanks to the incredible computers that are inside of the F-16 and also its ability to actually mount and launch these AGM-88s properly. The F-16 can lock on to these anti-air batteries at the maximum range of the AGM-88 Harm and fire that thing off, and it would already know where its target is and be able to travel to it and hit it, instead of taking a chance and firing it off and hoping that it would find a SAM out there somewhere and then hit it. This is a massive leap up, because not only can the F-16 provide a great deal of air support, close air support, and also air superiority, but it can also do anti-radar, or as they call it in the US, wild weasel sorties of taking out Russian surface-to-air missile defense batteries and missile defense batteries and anti-aircraft batteries in general. They could take out Tunguskas, they could take out Shokas, S-300s, S-400s, anything you could think of, they would be able to take it out as long as they had a radar on it. And that is why the Russians are incredibly scared of having something like the F-16, and even worse, if the United States provided an aircraft like the F-15, which we're thinking they wouldn't. There's a very small amount of F-15s, and these things generally have to be made to order, and so we don't think that there's just enough of them lying around to be sent over there. So these are a little bit more unlikely, but if the F-15E was to possibly be sent to Ukraine, the entirety of the war could shift out of Russia's favor forever. They would never even be able to have an idea of even stabilizing a front line from that point forward, because the close air support and the ability to control the skies over Ukraine would be completely in Ukraine's hands. Not only would the Ukrainians be able to stop Russian aircraft from entering their airspace, they would also be able to destroy anything on the ground completely unopposed, and they would also be able to destroy Russian surface-to-air missile batteries and fighter aircraft trying to enter their airspace a whole lot easier than they are right now, just thanks to the F-16. And if the F-15 or F-15E, sorry, was added in, then it would become a whole lot worse for them. And so you can see why the Russians really fear the fact that American aircraft may enter Ukraine is because it would turn the war around against them forever. It would never turn back in their favor, just due to the addition of a couple of different classes of aircraft and the weapons that they're able to carry. And so that's why the Russians have drawn this red line, and we're actually scared to cross it, is because they know how serious of a threat American fighter aircraft, well, multi-role aircraft can be if they're introduced into the war. And so if they are, they may as well have already lost, and they may as well treat it as if that is breached and American aircraft do get introduced into the Ukrainian Air Force, they've already lost the war. So might as well put all the chips on the table and threaten everyone with everything they got to make sure that they don't go into Ukraine. And so far, it appears that the Russian bluff has been successful. It looks like they have been able to stop every country from ever sending in any sort of modern Western aircraft. And until we see anything to change that idea, it looks like it'll stay that way for the rest of the war. But maybe in the future, because it's always been on the table, we will actually see F-16s in Ukraine operating with all of the weapon systems that they have in the U.S. Air Force, being able to take on the Su-30s, the S-300s, and also the ground forces as well. And so with that, I hope y'all enjoyed this little summary as to why the Russian Air Force and the Russian Federation as a whole fears the introduction of American aircraft into Ukraine. And with that, I thank you all so much once again for watching. If y'all did enjoy, please make sure to support us on Patreon. That helps us to continue to make these videos. And also like, comment, and subscribe. That also helps us out a whole load and helps us to keep this channel running. And so with that, I thank you all once again, and I will see you all in the next video.